what does a student need to do in order to be punished? I mean,
Oh,
how petty do we have to be in order for this to take effect? Because it seems to me that it could be quite corrupt. So if Philip was an administrator and he didn't like little Johnny B down there, he would just be looking. And so we're dealing with confirmation bias constantly. And poor little Johnny, he's just standing there because he can't even sit down anymore.
Mm-mm.
So how
Yeah.
is there something to that?
yeah. And sociologists and social scientists have done lots of studies to show this and look at the bias that's behind it, the kind of psychological and cultural factors. Punishment is very subjective. In Philip's own case, if the teacher had looked a split second sooner, did the teacher notice you retaliating because the teacher was poised to be looking at you because you were kind of a troublemaker in other cases? Or was it just a kind of accident of timing and the teacher looked over and saw you?
I was a little troublemaker sometimes.
So there are kids that get
So,
reputations. There are teachers that there have
yeah.
been some studies about when teachers are primed to look for misbehavior. Researchers studied what children they watched in watching a group of children, and there were racial differences that teachers tended to watch Black children, expecting them to be the troublemakers in a classroom. So there are a lot of racial elements to this as well.
Is that the chin study?
I don't know. I don't have it in front of
Mm-hmm.
me. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to
Yeah.
cite general studies here since I'm not looking at any notes.
So what I did here, because this I know the study that you're talking about. They look for the three B's. The three B's are 50% receive 50% more suspensions or expulsions. And that's if you are a big Black boy.
Oh,
Right.
oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the data is devastating. The gender imbalance is striking.
Mm-hmm.
In corporal punishment, it's 80% of kids who are hit in school settings are boys. I mean,
Yeah.
the suspension numbers are also the gender imbalance is striking. The racial imbalance, especially for Black children, is striking. And then depending on the location, you have
Mm-hmm.
some overrepresentation of Latino students, you have some overrepresentation of Indigenous students, but Black boys for sure are at a
Yeah.
nexus.
Yeah, because I think in that same study they monitored how the teachers were actually observing what was going on, and they were not paying attention to any of the other kids who may have been doing things that they should have taken a look at. And
And like you mentioned, confirmation bias, that's part of it. You
Mm-hmm.
right,
see
Yeah.
you
and it
see
does,
someone doing something who you already think is kind of a bad kid. The same exact behavior is filtered through a different lens if you see someone as a good kid.
and it doesn't matter what race you are as a teacher because they found it
Yeah.
clear across the board.
Well, as a society, we've also encouraged fear of big Black men. Many of those criminal characters, those menacing characters, are big Black men.
Yeah.
And that just is a prejudice that we get from our society, our media, our outlets, everything. We think about that all the time. Big Black men are the scariest of all. So big Black boys, naturally scary.
But see, when they talked about the three B's, this is going to be a little bit of a surprise. They were talking about preschool. That they were talking about 3 and 4 year olds when they were doing it. And it goes back because I
That's
was
awful.
listening to Dr. Rosemary Allen out of Denver, and she was talking about how 8 months old kids will go into a place to daycare or the pre-K setting because statistics show that if children enter into a pre-K at an early age, that it actually helps them cognitively to achieve and do better in school in the future. But you
Hmm.
have 8-month-old kids throwing a temper tantrum and being suspended or expelled from the program. And kids do this because this is when they learn how to self-regulate. And Philip, you worked in pre-K
I did. I worked in
and
a daycare for
as
5
as
years.
I did, and And for me, it was 40 years ago, but it's still the same thing. I mean, a kid would throw a temper tantrum and you just would take them and you'd put them to a place where they could be removed and you'd say, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on you. But when you decide that you can stop and rejoin us, then just let us know. Or if you need anything, let me know. So I would keep an eye on them, but they were removed from the group and then they could join the group when they were ready. But so they were taken care of. But these people, they talked about how what they were looking for was whether or not they were going to be injurious or be a danger to any of the other students or anybody else. So that was the typical reason for that. But I never would have thought, I never would have considered that back then.
Yeah, we have very little data about discipline in early childhood settings or in preschool or pre-K settings.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government reported it out through the civil rights data collection once. I think 2017-18 is the last time we have data, and I think it's the only time we have data. But that data set is incredibly messy. It's pretty untrustworthy in terms of what was showing up there. But there was a survey study done, I want to say out of Yale, that looked at early childhood settings, and it is believed that exclusionary discipline, suspensions and expulsions, are more common in pre-K than at any other grade level, actually, expulsions in particular.
Mm-hmm. And those follow the kids because it follows their record, takes them into grade school. So if they were expelled for one reason and they want to go someplace else, well, that's on their record. And then when they're in elementary school, that's still on their record. What does it teach the kid about what they're worth or their value in a sense, and who's there to help them if they need help, or how do they resolve these issues?
Yeah.
If whenever they have a need that's not being met let's say that they're just hyperactive, or maybe you have people who just don't understand that when you have a gang of little kids, you might as well use super glue because you're not going to get them all to sit down, and you've got to take a lot of deep breaths. You've got to have a great attitude. But if they're not willing to sit there for 10 minutes quietly, and there's examples of this that in the articles that I was reading, that a kid they will look for confirmation and affirmation from the teacher, but if they don't get it, then they just lose it, and then they get picked on by the teacher. But if they're not getting it then what are we telling them about later on in life? So some of this is actually starting to happen.
Yeah,
So
two things. One, you pointed out the idea that kids are just learning self-regulation at this time. I have learned some interesting things around teacher training and some elements that are missing around developmentally appropriate behavior. And this is true at the early childhood level all the way up through adolescence, that teachers don't get the training to understand what is a developmentally appropriate response to adversity or frustration or embarrassment, things that students are responding to in classrooms in ways that are inappropriate behavior. If the teachers knew more about where it was coming from, that it was a place of not having the skills to problem solve, rather than being a disrespectful kid who was trying to disrupt a classroom because they didn't like the teacher, or something more malicious like that. That little shift that can come from pretty minimal kind of training can really help teachers respond, I think, a little more patiently in the classroom.
right. And I think, and Philip, you and I were talking, I don't remember how long ago, but students tend to act out when they feel lost and they don't feel as though that they can participate because
Oh yeah.
they don't have whatever it is. They don't have that chunk of knowledge.
Yeah, well,
or
when Tara said that about that, when they don't get that response from this teacher, then they're left with basically innovating their own responses. And we're talking about a 3, 4, or 5-year-olds, innovating their own responses.
But even adolescents.
Oh,
even
and
teenagers.
especially in adolescence too. They'll really innovate.
Right. They innovate and they have themselves removed
Yeah.
so they don't have to look, so they don't have to feel humiliated and they don't have to be the clown.
Yeah. Well,
And like you're saying,
they
a lot of
chose it.
academics call it push out, the process of making kids feel like they are not welcome in schools. And
Mm-hmm.
they get this
Yeah.
lesson over and over again if schools continue to push them out rather than figure out why they're behaving the way they are or, finding a way to help them stay.
Right.
The push out ends up looking like dropout or forced transfer or some of these on the edges of exclusionary discipline.
Legal problems.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it's well known that in the neighborhoods, when drug dealing showed up, you make a whole lot more money just right away working within that business than you can even after high school and beyond. So it
Part
became
of,
a
I mean,
real easy choice sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, and absenteeism is at crisis levels right now, and part of the reason
Yeah.
is a lot of kids found out during COVID when they were, school was part-time and online and asynchronous that a lot of them were working and helping support their families and just never went back.
But then
Yeah.
I think what they also may have experienced is a sense of freedom. Because if you are locked up in that building all day and you are experiencing what most workers experience when they have to go into their cubicle all day long and they get a half hour for lunch, but they're still in the same building and then they're back in there and they really don't have any other way to let off some steam in a sense.
No
And
recess.
these are
Right.
kids. And it's gotten worse ever since we started all this testing, trying to get them going. And we don't allow them the process time or the time to actually just kick up their feet and just feel footloose and fancy free, for lack of a better term. But they need to have a lot more activity, a lot more kinesthetics going on in order for them to process the information and also just to shake off all this energy because they're still growing and their brains are still developing until what, 24, 25?
Well, that was part of the kind of early behavior, talking to people, where's all this coming from? Why are we seeing all these behavior problems as schools are reopening? And that's what people were talking about. It's like these kids went for sometimes over a year being able to sit however they wanted, lie down with their laptop on their laps, get up and get snacks whenever they wanted, go to the bathroom whenever they wanted. They didn't have teachers constantly redirecting their behavior, giving them more rules. So they're coming back. Not only are they having to deal with the kind of social elements of being in groups of kids their age and dealing with all the things that come with that, all of the rules and structure to school was, they had gotten out of the habit, or for some kids, they never got into the habit of being a middle schooler or being a high schooler or being in elementary school because they were at those transition points at the beginning of COVID. And so it was a lot of work to get kids used to sitting still for a whole day, following rules for a whole day.
Thank you for joining us and watching this outtake from our regular podcast. We really appreciate it. Now, if you could just hit that subscribe and that like button, it would really help with the algorithm. Also, if you have ideas about something more that you want us to do or how we can improve the show, let us know. We're always open to learning. So, until we see you again, thank you.